The Taylor family thought they were going on a peaceful vacation, but their trip to Lakeview Resort turned into a battle against racism, corruption, and abuse of power. What started as a simple getaway soon became a fight for justice that would shake an entire town. The road stretched endlessly before the Taylor family, sunlight gleaming off the hood of their SUV as Malcolm drove with calm focus. His wife, Samantha, humming softly to a song on the radio, and their young son, Elijah, pointing out every passing billboard with a child's excitement. This was supposed to be their chance to escape the constant grind of city life, a well-earned vacation at Lakeview Resort. Malcolm, though secretly an FBI agent working undercover on a long-running case, had promised his family this week would be theirs. No work, no distractions, only laughter, rest, and peace. But beneath that promise, he carried the quiet tension of a man who knew danger had a way of finding him, even when he wasn't looking for it. Their first stop was a small roadside diner, the kind with peeling paint, a neon sign that flickered, and a parking lot filled with dusty pickup trucks. Samantha and Elijah slipped into a booth while Malcolm ordered coffee at the counter. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, froze when she saw the family. Whispers floated from nearby tables, stares sharpened, and though no one spoke, directly, the air shifted with a silent hostility. Elijah, too young to understand, only asked why the other kids wouldn't wave back when he smiled. Samantha squeezed his hand, her voice steady but low, saying some people just didn't know how to be kind. Malcolm's jaw tightened as he watched a man spit into his napkin and mutter a word that made his blood run cold. It was only the beginning. By the time they pulled into Lakeview Resort, the sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. From a distance, the place looked perfect. Rows of cabins, a sparkling pool, manicured lawns, and the faint sound of laughter drifting through the air. But the moment the Taylors stepped out of their SUV, the smiles faded. Conversations hushed. Guests lounging near the lobby doors gave them a once-over that carried more judgment than curiosity. The receptionist forced a smile, her voice brittle, as she checked them in, over-explaining the rules as if expecting them to break one. Still, Samantha tried to hold on to optimism, telling Elijah they were going to have fun no matter what anyone else thought. The following afternoon, Elijah begged to play at the pool. Samantha accompanied him, soaking in the sun from a lounge chair while her son splashed happily in the shallow end. For a moment, it almost felt normal, but then shadows stretched across the water. Two men in uniform, Officers Marks and Riley. Their boots clanked against the deck, their expressions sharp with the smug confidence of men used to intimidating others. Riley leaned close, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he questioned Samantha about whether she belonged there, asking if she was a guest or just wandering in. Elijah froze mid-splash, sensing the shift. Samantha, calm but firm, explained that her family was checked in, showing her room key card, but the officers didn't back down. Riley smirked, whispering something to Marks that made them both laugh before they turned their attention on Elijah, joking cruelly about kids who forget their place. That was the moment Malcolm arrived, towels in hand. His expression darkened instantly as he stepped between his wife and the officers. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp and controlled. Marks puffed his chest, asking who he thought he was to interrupt police business. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He reached into his wallet and revealed the badge that glinted under the sunlight, FBI. The effect was immediate. Their laughter cut short, their posture stiffened, but instead of retreating, the tension thickened. Riley's jaw tightened as he muttered that this wasn't over, his eyes promising trouble. Later that evening, the hotel manager appeared at their door, a forced smile plastered on her face. She spoke of misunderstandings, offered free meal vouchers, spa credits, and complimentary upgrades as if luxury could erase humiliation. Malcolm listened silently, then shook his head. "We're not here for perks. We're here for respect," he said firmly, and closed the door. Samantha stood beside him, proud of his refusal, though she could see the storm gathering in his eyes. When the family finally settled in for the night, Elijah fast asleep in his bed, Samantha unpacking quietly, Malcolm walked to the door to double-check the lock. That was when he saw it, scratched deep into the paint, crude and menacing. "Get out while you can." He traced the words with his hand, his jaw clenching. This was no accident, no drunken prank. It was a message, a warning, a line, drawn in the sand. Their peaceful vacation had already turned into something darker. And though Samantha didn't yet see the carving, Malcolm knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning, and whoever wanted them gone wasn't going to stop with words. The next morning, the sun rose over Lakeview Resort, painting the horizon in gentle shades of pink and gold. But peace was already far from the Taylor family's reality. Samantha, trying to make the best of the day, wandered into the small resort cafe for coffee. That was where she met Lorraine Carter, a woman whose presence carried both quiet strength and lingering sorrow. Lorraine recognized the unease in Samantha's eyes and leaned closer, her voice trembling as she shared her story. Her husband, once a respected local business owner, had been wrongfully imprisoned after a manufactured charge. Marks and Riley, the same officers who had harassed the Taylors, were at the center of it. Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered that the town was controlled by fear and silence. Before leaving, she slipped Samantha a small USB drive, her hand shaking. "This," she said softly, "is the truth they tried to bury. Keep it safe." Back in their cabin, Samantha handed the USB to Malcolm, her voice low but urgent. Malcolm inserted it into his laptop, his instincts sharpening the moment the first files opened. Grainy videos filled the screen, footage of Marks and Riley beating, handcuffed men, reports doctored with false charges, audio clips of officers laughing while discussing ruined lives. With every file, the picture grew clearer, a system riddled with corruption. Malcolm's pulse quickened when he found one folder labeled Operations. Inside were coded transactions, falsified court records, and names he had already encountered in his ongoing FBI investigation. The connection was undeniable. This wasn't just local harassment, it was part of a wider network of abuse and cover-ups. As Malcolm processed the evidence, Elijah, ever curious, trailed behind his parents in the hotel lobby later that afternoon. He clutched his small tablet, pretending to play games while his sharp eyes followed Officer Riley approaching his father. The officer leaned close, his voice dripping venom as he hissed, "Your badge won't protect you here. Walk away, or your family won't leave this town whole." Riley didn't notice the faint red light of Elijah's device recording every word. The boy's hands trembled, but he knew instinctively that this was important. He kept silent, waiting for the right moment to share it. That evening, as the resort grew quiet and most guests retreated to their rooms, Malcolm stepped outside for air, his instincts unsettled. The parking lot was dim, lit only by scattered lamps that left long shadows. He barely had time to react before Marks and Riley emerged from the darkness. Without warning, Marks lunged, his fist slamming into Malcolm's ribs. Riley circled behind, a glint of steel flashing in his hand. The fight erupted in brutal chaos. Malcolm, trained and disciplined, fought back with precision, every strike calculated. He twisted Marks's arm, sending the officer crashing into a parked car, but Riley was relentless, slamming Malcolm against the hood. The clash of fists and boots echoed through the empty lot, every blow carrying years of unchecked power meeting, unyielding resistance. Blood streaked Malcolm's lip, but his determination didn't waver. Unbeknownst to the officers, Samantha had followed at a distance, worry pulling her into the night. She crouched low behind a column, her phone trembling. in her grip as she recorded every word exchanged between the men. Between grunts and threats, the officers let their guard down, spitting venom about the bribes they had taken, the people they had silenced, and the judges they had bought. Every damning confession captured in Samantha's recording would soon become their undoing. The fight reached its breaking point as Malcolm pinned Riley against the hood, twisting the knife from his grip and throwing it across the pavement. Mark stumbled to his feet, bloodied and furious, but flashing red and blue lights suddenly cut through the darkness. Dozens of SUVs pulled into the lot, doors flying open as federal agents poured out, weapons drawn. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The command rang out, firm and unshakable. Riley froze, his face draining of color, while Marks raised his hands slowly, the arrogance in his eyes finally replaced by fear. Agents swarmed them, cuffing their wrists as Malcolm staggered back, chest heaving. Samantha rushed forward, slipping her arm around him, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. From the shadows of the crowd, another figure emerged. The hotel manager, Karen Foster. For years, she had maintained her image of polite efficiency, but tonight, the truth surfaced. Documents retrieved from the USB tied her name to fraudulent. Accounts and money funneled to silence victims. An agent read her rights as she stammered, her mask of professionalism shattering under the weight of exposure. Guests watched from the balconies above, their whispers rippling like wind through the night, finally seeing the corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. As Marks, Riley, and Karen were led away in handcuffs, the air felt different. Heavy, with the shock of truth, but lighter, with the first breath of justice. Samantha glanced at Malcolm, her eyes both fearful and proud. Elijah appeared at the edge of the crowd, clutching his tablet, his small face solemn but determined as he whispered, "I recorded him too, Dad." Malcolm knelt, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. In that moment, he knew the fight wasn't just about law, it was about protecting those who had no one else to fight for them. And the battle, though far from over, had finally found its first victory. The morning after the arrests, the quiet mountain town awoke to a storm it could no longer contain. For years, whispers had been buried under threats, lies, and fear. But now, the silence was broken. In the grand ballroom of the Lakeview Resort, the FBI gathered reporters from across the state. Cameras flashed as Director Harris stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of what was being revealed. "Today," he declared, "we have uncovered decades of systematic abuse, corruption, and obstruction carried out under the protection of authority." Behind him, images from the seized files flickered on a screen, blurred videos of beatings, doctored reports, and falsified arrest records. The truth was undeniable, laid bare for the world to see. As journalists scribbled furiously, Harris continued. Officers Marks and Riley now face 37 federal charges, ranging from abuse of power to conspiracy and racketeering. The room buzzed with the magnitude of the announcement. These were not minor infractions. They were crimes that carried the weight of entire ruined lives. For too long, men like Marks and Riley had been shielded by a badge that should have represented justice. But today, that shield was shattered. News traveled fast, and within hours, the Department of Justice released a statement confirming not only the charges, but also a broader federal investigation into the hotel chain itself. Records found on the USB and corroborated by Karen Foster's involvement revealed that the chain had knowingly turned a blind eye to complaints. In some cases, staff had been pressured to handle victims quietly, offering discounts and perks in exchange for silence. What had seemed like customer service gestures were now revealed as calculated bribes designed to bury truth beneath polished smiles. At home, Samantha watched the press conference from her phone, her hands trembling not with fear, but with an overwhelming sense of vindication. For days, she had carried the weight of hostility, the sharp stares and whispered warnings, but now the tables had turned. That evening, she sat by the window, her laptop open, and poured her heart into a post. That spread like wildfire. She described the poolside incident, the message scratched into their hotel door, and the night she watched her husband fight for his life in the parking lot. She attached the video she had recorded of Marks and Riley bragging about their crimes. Her final line read simply, "We came for a vacation but found a nightmare that too many families have lived before us. Silence protects the guilty. Speaking up protects the innocent." Within hours, her words went viral. Tens of thousands shared her post, voices rising in solidarity, anger, and grief. Parents who had once dismissed their children's warnings remembered them with new clarity. Travelers recalled strange encounters brushed aside as misunderstandings. And most of all, families of victims who had been silenced for years finally saw an opening. Emails poured into the FBI hotline, phones rang non-stop, and more names joined the growing list of those who had suffered under Marks, Riley, and their protectors. In a sterile interrogation room downtown, Karen Foster sat across from federal agents, her once flawless posture sagging under the weight of exposure. At first, she denied everything, insisting she was just a hotel manager following orders. But confronted with Samantha's recording and the files from the USB, her defenses crumbled. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she confessed to shredding complaints, altering digital logs, and accepting bribes to make problems go away. For every guest who came forward with a story, there was a document she had buried, a payment she had approved. Her signature was everywhere, a silent accomplice to every injustice. Her confession, recorded and signed, became another cornerstone in the crumbling wall of silence. Meanwhile, a young journalist named Cassie Lopez watched the chaos unfold from her newsroom. Barely in her 20s, she had spent months chasing whispers of corruption in small towns, often dismissed as chasing shadows. But tonight, the shadows had turned into headlines. With sharp focus and fiery determination, she pieced the story together, weaving the Taylor's ordeal into the larger web of systemic abuse. Her article, published under the bold headline, "Vacation Turns into a Federal Sting, Family Exposes. Years of Police Corruption," was picked up by national outlets within hours. The story was no longer local. It was a national reckoning. Television anchors debated the implications live, protesters gathered outside the courthouse, and the town that had once hidden behind politeness and intimidation now found itself the center of a storm. The community, once silent, was split between those who had suffered quietly and those who had profited from the silence. For every victim who found courage to step forward, another crack appeared in the wall that had protected the guilty. Through it all, Malcolm remained composed but restless. He knew this was bigger than Marks and Riley, bigger than Karen Foster, bigger than even the hotel chain. Corruption never exists in isolation. It spreads like roots beneath the surface, feeding off shadows. And though the wall of silence was crumbling, he understood that walls rarely fall all at once. There were still more secrets hidden in this town, and he would need to dig deeper to uncover them. For now, though, the truth had broken free. And for the first time in years, the victims of this place weren't whispering in the shadows. They were speaking out loud, and the whole world was listening. The sun rose over the small town with a warmth it hadn't felt in years. For the first time, people stepped out of their homes without lowering their eyes in fear of who might be watching. At the courthouse steps, the air was charged with anticipation as reporters, families, and neighbors gathered. The doors opened, and out walked James Carter, frail but smiling, his hand clutching tightly to Lorraine's. After years of wrongful imprisonment, after nights spent behind bars for a crime he never committed, he was finally free. Lorraine wept into his shoulder, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You're home." The crowd erupted into applause, not just for James, but for the hope his release symbolized, that truth had triumphed, and that justice, however late, could still arrive. Inside, Malcolm stood quietly with Samantha and Elijah, watching the reunion with quiet pride. Lorraine caught his eye across the crowd, and with tears streaming down her face, she mouthed, "Thank you." Malcolm nodded, humbled by the knowledge that their family's courage had been the spark that turned whispers into a storm. For James, freedom was only the beginning. His name would be cleared, his record erased, and his dignity restored. But more importantly, his story would no longer be buried. It would be a reminder of how fragile justice could be and how necessary it was to protect it. A week later in Washington, Malcolm found himself standing on a stage he had never imagined. The FBI had called a special ceremony to honor not only his work, but the bravery of his entire family. Director Harris addressed the audience, his voice resonating with conviction. "It is rare that we recognize courage not only in the field but within the heart of a family. Malcolm Taylor, undercover agent, stood firm against corruption. But he was not alone. Samantha Taylor, through her vigilance and courage, gave us the recordings that exposed the truth. And young Elijah Taylor, whose presence of mind captured what many grown men might have feared to record, became the turning point of this case." The applause was thunderous. Elijah, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, stood close to his mother, gripping her hand tightly. For Malcolm, this recognition wasn't about medals or applause. It was about proving to his son that standing up for what was right was worth every risk. Back in the community, change was no longer a dream, but a necessity. Federal monitors were assigned to oversee the local police department, ensuring accountability where none had existed before. Officers would no longer patrol unchecked. Every badge would be held to the standard of transparency and justice. The hotel industry, too, was forced into reforms. Chains across the state introduced strict guidelines for reporting harassment and discrimination, with federal penalties for cover-ups. For too long, hospitality had been a mask hiding injustice. Now, every lobby, every poolside, every guest room would carry the weight of accountability. At Elijah's school, the story of courage reached the ears of teachers and classmates. During an assembly, his principal called him to the stage. "Elijah Taylor," she said, smiling with pride, "showed us all that courage doesn't come from size or age. It comes from knowing right from wrong and having the bravery to act." The gymnasium roared with cheers as Elijah stood nervously, clutching a certificate. For him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about knowing he had helped his father, his mother, and people like Mr. Carter. That small moment in the lobby, with his phone, had become a turning point in history. Weeks later, as summer stretched into golden evenings, families gathered once again at the community pool, the same place where the nightmare had begun. But this time, the air was different. Laughter echoed freely, children splashed without fear, and parents watched without worry of who might come storming in. Samantha sat on the poolside chair, her hand resting in Malcolm's, watching Elijah race across the water with other kids. Lorraine and James were there too, smiling with a peace they hadn't felt in years. The community wasn't perfect. Healing would take time. But this was a start. As the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Malcolm stood at the edge of the pool, looking out at the scene. He thought about the nights of fear, the whispers of threats, the bruises, and the lies. And then he looked at the joy before him, the children playing, the families embracing, the sound of safety returning to a place that had once felt poisoned. It wasn't victory in the sense of triumph over enemies. It was victory in reclaiming dignity, hope, and the right to live free. In the final stillness of that evening, the narrator's voice carried the truth that would linger long after. Justice is not just about punishing the guilty. It's about ensuring no family has to suffer the same pain again. And sometimes, one family's courage is enough to change an entire system. And as laughter filled the twilight air, the Taylors knew Their story had become something larger than themselves. It had become a promise for the future.